Evan Cole's life had been reduced to checklists, and he liked it that way. Wake at 5:10 a.m. Coffee black, no sugar. Wake Lily at 5:45. Lunchbox backpack, hair brushed just enough to pass. Drive to school. Smile, wave, don't look back too long. At 39,000 feet, with the steady hum of a Boeing 737 wrapped around him, checklists were comfort. They didn't ask questions. They didn't remember things Evan worked hard to forget. Cruise checklist complete, his first officer said, relaxed, tapping the screen. Evan nodded, eyes scanning instruments with the ease of muscle memory. Outside the cockpit windows, the Nevada sky stretched wide and empty, pale blue fading into something colder. The desert below looked harmless from up here, flat, endless, quiet. Flight 218 was full today. A choir returning to Ohio. A pair of honeymooners asleep shoulder to shoulder. A handful of business travelers pretending not to feel turbulence that didn't exist. And in seat 3A, just behind the cockpit door, Lily Cole, his entire world, colored quietly with a purple crayon. Evan glanced back through the cracked cockpit door. She looked up and gave him a grin, missing one tooth. That smile had saved his life more times than she would ever know. Smooth air, the first officer said, looks like an easy one. Evan almost laughed. Easy flights made him uneasy. They always had. The radio crackled softly, routine chatter between controllers and aircraft scattered across the western skies. Evan listened without really hearing, his mind drifting to tonight's plans. Frozen pizza, homework, a promise he'd made to watch the same animated movie for the 5th time this week. Normal. That was the word he clung to. 10 years ago, his life had been anything but. A subtle vibration shivered through the aircraft. Not turbulence. Evan felt it instantly deep in his chest, like a memory stirring. The instruments didn't register anything abnormal. Airspeed steady, altitude locked, engines purring. The first officer frowned. You feel that? Yeah, Evan said quietly, not weather. Before either could speak again, the radio crackled, this time sharp, urgent. Attention all civilian aircraft in Sector Delta 7. Maintain present heading and altitude. Do not deviate. Military activity in progress. The first officer stiffened. That's unusual. Evan didn't answer. His hands rested lightly on the yoke, knuckles pale. Military activity. Those words pulled something loose inside him. ATC, the first officer replied carefully, confirmed duration of restriction. A pause too long. Then stand by. Outside the window, a faint streak of white cut across the sky, fast, deliberate, wrong. Evan's stomach tightened. He knew that speed. Moments later, the cabin lights flickered. A distant roar thundered past, close enough that the aircraft shuddered. Gasps rippled through the cabin behind them. What the hell was that? The first officer whispered. Evan's jaw tightened. Fighter. As if on cue, two shapes tore through the sky off the left wing, sleek, angular, deadly. F-22 Raptors. Close enough to see the sharp angles of their wings, the heat shimmer trailing behind them. Commercial pilots weren't supposed to see that. Lily's crayon clattered to the floor. Daddy, her voice crackled through the intercom, small and unsure. Evan forced his voice steady. It's okay, sweetheart, just some Air Force jets. He switched the intercom off before she could hear the tension he couldn't hide anymore. The radio crackled again, this time on a secure frequency that Evan hadn't heard since another lifetime. Unknown aircraft, you are violating restricted airspace. Identify immediately. The voice was calm, professional, young. Evan's heart began to pound. The first officer looked at him. You ever seen anything like this? Evan swallowed, not as a civilian. Another pause. Then a second voice cut in, older, sharper, edged with authority. Target not responding. Radar signatures strange. Evan leaned closer to the radio without realizing it. Command, the voice continued. This profile matches archived combat behavior. Archived? Evan felt cold. ATC came back on, struggling to sound composed. Flight 218, maintain course. You are not in danger. That was a lie. Evan had heard it before. Suddenly, the radio clicked, and a single word slid through the cockpit like a blade through silk. Ghost Rider. The first officer blinked. Did he just? Evan's hands clenched. That name wasn't on any civilian frequency. It wasn't supposed to exist at all. Ghost Rider wasn't a call sign. It was a ghost. A man who flew missions that never happened. A pilot whose name was scrubbed, whose records vanished, whose face never made the news. A man Evan had buried the day Lily was born. Flight 218, the voice said again, cautious now. Confirm you are not experiencing flight control anomalies. Evan forced himself to breathe. Negative, he replied evenly. Aircraft is stable. The Raptors streaked past again, closer this time, escorting or shielding the commercial jet. The first officer whispered, "Why are they flying that close?" Evan didn't answer. Because someone was using them as cover. He saw it now, the subtle shadow in the clouds, the way the air bent wrong. An aircraft without a transponder, flying blind, silent, dangerous. Flying like someone who knew how to hide. The radio crackled again. Flight 218, the Raptor pilot said carefully. We're tracking an unidentified aircraft matching your altitude and speed. Its maneuvers are deliberate. Evan closed his eyes for half a second. Have you noticed anything unusual? The pilot asked. Evan opened his eyes and stared at the sky ahead. He noticed everything. The way the unknown aircraft mirrored small adjustments. The way it anticipated air currents before they formed. The way it stayed exactly where missiles couldn't go. He taught those tactics once. I haven't noticed anything, Evan said finally. Silence followed. Then the Raptor pilot spoke again, quiet, almost reverent. Copy that, Ghost Rider. The first officer turned slowly toward Evan. Why did he call you that? Evan didn't respond. Outside, the shadow moved closer. And somewhere in the empty sky above America, someone had recognized him. Not Evan Cole, single father and commercial pilot, but the man he used to be. And the flight that was supposed to be routine had just become something else entirely. The silence after the call sign was heavier than turbulence. The first officer stared at Evan, waiting for an explanation that didn't come. Evan kept his eyes forward, scanning instruments that suddenly felt irrelevant compared to the sky outside. The unknown aircraft was still there. He could feel it the way a pilot feels another presence in formation, even without seeing it. You okay? The first officer asked quietly. Yeah, Evan said too fast, just thinking. That wasn't a lie. His mind was racing through old instincts he'd sworn never to use again. The radio crackled. Flight 218, be advised, military intercept is ongoing. Continue present heading. Evan knew what that meant. Don't panic, don't ask questions, let us handle it. But whoever it was wasn't playing by the rules. The shadow shifted. Not visually, yet, but aerodynamically. The air pressure nudged the Boeing ever so slightly, like a finger brushing a shoulder. Evan adjusted instinctively, micro-correcting before the first officer even noticed. The Raptor pilot spoke again. Target just matched your correction. The first officer's eyes widened. Matched it, how would they? Evan cut in smoothly. Probably turbulence effects. The Raptor pilot didn't answer immediately. Instead, the two fighters peeled outward, widening their arc. Evan knew why. They were testing the shadow, seeing how it reacted when the commercial jet was no longer bracketed. The response was immediate. The pressure changed again. The unknown aircraft slid inward, closer to Flight 218, using its mass and proximity to mask itself. Evan's pulse spiked. "He's using us," the first officer whispered. "Yes," Evan said softly, "and he's good at it." "Too good." "Command," one of the Raptor pilots said, tension creeping into his voice. "Targets deliberately maintaining civilian cover. Row options are limited." Limited meant dangerous. Evan glanced at the passenger display. Altitude steady, speed normal. Behind him were 147 lives who trusted the calm voice over the intercom, including one small girl who believed her dad could fix anything. Lily's drawing was still on the cockpit floor, a stick figure plane with a smiling pilot at the front. Evan bent slightly and nudged it back toward his seat with his shoe, as if that small act could anchor him. "Flight 218, the Raptor leader said carefully, requesting confirmation. "Have you ever flown high-performance tactical aircraft?" The first officer snapped his head toward Evan. "What?" Evan felt the moment stretch, thin as wire. "No," Evan replied evenly. "I fly commercial." Another pause. Then quieter, "Copy." But the Raptor's movements changed. Tighter, sharper. They weren't buying it. The unknown aircraft surged upward half a degree, barely anything, but it was enough to cause wake interaction. The Boeing shuddered, alarms chirping briefly before stabilizing. The cabin murmured, fear rippled backward. "Flight 218, ATC said urgently. "Confirm stability." "Stable," Evan replied instantly. He compensated again, small rudder input, precise throttle adjustment. The movement was invisible to anyone but a combat-trained eye. The unknown aircraft reacted instantly, countering before the air even settled. The Raptor pilot exhaled audibly over the radio. "That's impossible." Evan felt ice creep into his veins. "They're anticipating him," the pilot continued. "Not reacting, anticipating." The first officer whispered, "Evan, how would anyone know to do that?" Evan didn't answer. Because there was only one way. Training. Personal. Years ago, Evan had run a classified program designed to teach pilots how to survive against enemies with superior numbers. He taught them to think ahead of physics, to feel airflow like a language, to fly not where the enemy was, but where they had to be. And he'd given that training a nickname. Ghost Riding the Wind. The radio came alive again, this time with a new tone, less formal, more human. "Flight 218, the Raptor leader said slowly. "This is Viper 1. Off the record, we're reading archived maneuver patterns, ones that aren't supposed to exist." Evan's grip tightened. "They're tagged under one call sign," Viper 1 continued. "Ghost Rider." The cockpit felt smaller. The first officer stared at Evan now, realization dawning. "That's not." Evan raised a hand slightly. "Later." Outside, the shadow dipped. Evan reacted before thinking. Slight descent, compensating thrust, a move designed to force the follower to choose between collision risk or separation. The unknown aircraft chose neither. It slid perfectly into the pocket Evan had opened, invisible and untouchable. Viper 1 swore softly, "They know that move." Evan's heart sank. "Flight 218, Viper 1 said. "With all due respect, if you are who our data suggests, we need your help." "I can't," Evan said immediately. "You already are," the pilot replied. The Raptors adjusted again, flanking tighter now, but the unknown aircraft stayed glued to Flight 218, daring them to act. ATC broke in, voice shaking. "Military, confirm civilian aircraft safety." Viper 1 responded crisply, "Affirmative for now." For now. Evan imagined headlines, investigations, Lily watching news footage she didn't understand. He imagined a missile lock that shouldn't happen. The unknown aircraft shifted again, this time broadcasting a brief signal, encrypted narrowband meant for one receiver. Evan's headset crackled with a whisper. "Still flying safe, Evan." His breath caught. The voice was distorted, but familiar. Too familiar. "You taught me better than this." Evan's vision tunneled. The first officer saw his face pale. "Evan, who was that?" Evan swallowed hard. Someone from his past hadn't just survived. They'd found him. The unknown aircraft pulled slightly away, just enough to be seen, only for a second. A sharp-edged silhouette against the sun. No markings, no ID. "A ghost." "Viper 1, Evan said quietly, decision crystallizing. "I need you to do exactly what I say." The Raptor pilot didn't hesitate, standing by. Evan looked forward, jaw set. Because if he didn't take control now, this wasn't going to end with everyone landing safely. And somewhere in the sky, the ghost was smiling, waiting to see if Ghost Rider still remembered how to fly. Evan's heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady, trained, controlled, dangerous. "Viper 1, he said, eyes locked on the artificial horizon. "You and your wingman widen your spread by 12 degrees. Don't announce it." There was a half-second pause, then without question, copy, executing. The Raptors peeled outward, engines howling as they created the illusion of retreat. To anyone watching, especially someone arrogant enough to play games, it looked like hesitation. The Shadow reacted instantly. The pressure on Flight 218 changed again, heavier this time. Evan felt it in his bones. The unknown aircraft slid closer, exploiting the widened gap, settling into the dead zone no radar liked to admit existed. "He's moving in," the first officer whispered. "He's getting closer." "I know," Evan replied. "You said you were civilian," the first officer pressed, voice tight. "Civilians don't do this." Evan didn't look at him. Neither do ghosts. The cockpit alarm chirped softly, an advisory, nothing passengers would hear yet. Evan adjusted with surgical precision, fingers barely moving. His mind wasn't in the cockpit anymore. It was 10 years ago. Night missions, desert airfields, briefings that ended with signatures and silence. Young pilots watching him like he held the answers to survival itself. One of them had asked once, "What happens if we meet someone as good as you?" Evan had answered honestly. "Then pray they don't know your name." The radio crackled. "Ghost Rider," the distorted voice returned, intimate now, almost amused. "You always hated flying straight lines." Evan's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," the voice replied, "but here we are." The first officer heard it this time. His eyes widened. "That's someone's talking to you." "Yes," Evan said, "and he's using us." Outside, the unknown aircraft shifted slightly upward, baiting him. Evan ignored it. Instead, he did something subtle, something reckless. He reduced thrust by a fraction and increased angle of attack, just enough to create a deceptive lag in airflow, an old trick designed to make a follower misjudge timing. It was something only a handful of pilots on Earth would recognize. The unknown aircraft didn't fall for it. It matched perfectly. Viper 1's voice cut in, low and impressed. "Command, that was a Ghost Rider counter, confirming hostile pilot has elite familiarity." Command responded instantly. "Viper 1, disengage civilian proximity if possible." "If possible." The first officer leaned closer. "Evan, we need to tell them something. This is getting." "I know," Evan said. His eyes flicked to Lily's seat on the display. Seat 3A right behind him. He couldn't outrun the ghost. He couldn't expose the passengers to aggressive maneuvers. And he couldn't let the Raptors fire. There was only one option left. When he'd sworn off the night he held Lily in a hospital room, and chose life over legend. Viper 1, Evan said quietly. On my mark, descend 500 feet fast, then pull vertical. There was a pause. That'll leave you exposed. Only for a moment. And you? I'll take the hit. The first officer stared at him. You can't be serious. Evan finally turned to him. His eyes were calm but ancient. I need you to trust me. Before the first officer could respond, the unknown aircraft surged forward, testing him, daring him. Evan smiled grimly. Mark! The Raptor's dove, engine screaming, then clawed skyward in a sharp vertical climb that ripped the air apart. The Ghost reacted instantly, too instantly, sliding to stay masked behind Flight 218. Exactly what Evan wanted. Evan rolled the Boeing slightly, not enough to alarm passengers, just enough to alter wake turbulence in a specific pattern. A pattern he designed years ago to punish anyone flying too close. The air behind the jet collapsed into controlled chaos. The unknown aircraft shuddered violently. For the first time, it reacted instead of anticipated. Viper 1 gasped. You destabilized him. Yes, Evan said, but it won't last. The Ghost's voice crackled again. No amusement now. Still pulling tricks, it growled. You taught me that one too. Then you know what comes next, Evan replied. Silence. Then laughter short, sharp. That's the problem, Ghost Rider, I know all of it. The unknown aircraft recovered faster than physics should allow, surging upward and away, then snapping back in with terrifying precision. The first officer gripped his seat. We're going to lose them. No, Evan said, we're going to end this. He reached for a frequency he technically wasn't authorized to use. Command, Evan said calmly, this is Evan Cole. The room went dead quiet. A new voice replaced the chatter, older, colder. Say again. Evan Cole, he repeated, former test pilot, call sign Ghost Rider. You scrubbed me after Operation Black Halo. A long pause. Then we remember. So does he, Evan said. And if you don't clear me to maneuver, people are going to die. The silence stretched. The Ghost's aircraft edged closer again, looming like a predator. Finally, command responded. Ghost Rider, you are cleared. The words hit Evan like a verdict. Cleared to maneuver. The first officer whispered, what does that mean? Evan exhaled slowly. It means, he said, hands steady on the controls, I stopped flying like a commercial pilot. Outside, the sky seemed to tighten around them. Evan adjusted his posture, centering himself the way he used to before combat runs. Behind him, Lily laughed at something on her tablet, unaware the man flying her home had just crossed back into a life he never intended to return to. The Ghost moved into position, and Ghost Rider prepared to show him why some legends were never meant to be challenged. Evan's palms rested lightly on the yoke, deceptively calm. His mind raced faster than the air rushing past the windshield. The unknown aircraft had finally revealed its intent, aggressive, controlled, almost theatrical. Every subtle movement of Flight 218 was mirrored with eerie precision. This wasn't just skill. This was familiarity. Too much familiarity. The first officer, pale and tense, whispered, Evan, that thing is playing with us. With you. Yes, Evan replied quietly, and I have to play back. He glanced at Lily, earbuds in, blissfully unaware of the danger just beyond the cabin walls. She had no idea that her father was about to risk everything, not for glory, not for medals, but for her life and the lives of every person on board. The Raptor pilots flanked him now, providing cover and giving him room to maneuver. Their trust in a civilian, a single dad who they'd only ever heard about in hushed military archives, was absolute. Flight 218, Ghost Rider, you're cleared to engage evasive maneuvers. Viper 1's voice crackled, tension underlying every word. Evan exhaled. Clearance to maneuver. That single phrase unlocked instincts long buried under years of routine flights and bedtime stories. He made the first subtle adjustment, a tiny roll, imperceptible to the passengers but deadly precise in aerodynamics. The unknown aircraft reacted instantly, mirroring the move, as if it had been watching him his entire life. A thrill surged through Evan, ancient and familiar. This was a duel, not of missiles or guns, but of skill and wits at 39,000 feet, and for the first time in years he felt alive. The first officer swallowed hard. How is it matching you every move? Evan's jaw tightened. Because they learned from me. The words hung in the cockpit like smoke. He hadn't just trained pilots, he had trained shadows. And now one of those shadows was testing him. The unknown aircraft surged closer, closing the gap to dangerous proximity. For the first time, Evan felt the weight of what was at stake. One miscalculation and a small error could turn Flight 218 into debris. He glanced down at the passenger manifest on his tablet. There was no room for heroics, only precision, only calculation. Evan's mind whirred back a decade. Desert missions, night raids, operations erased from history, the exhilaration of the impossible, the burden of the unseen, the faces of teammates who had never returned. The Ghost wasn't just any pilot. It was one of his own. Someone who remembered the same tactics, the same instinctual moves, the same thought patterns he had once drilled into every cadet under his command. The radio crackled again, cutting through his thoughts. This time it was ATC or the Raptors. It was the Ghost. "Ghost Rider," the voice said, distorted but unmistakable. "You're rusty." Evan's lips tightened. Not rusty enough. A sudden lurch shook the plane. A controlled slip, just enough to force the intruder to choose its next move. The unknown aircraft countered immediately, perfectly. Evan recognized the signature immediately. He exhaled slowly, a grim smile on his face. "They're not just good, they're better than I remembered." Viper 1's voice came through again. "Ghost Rider, that move was textbook." "Yes," Evan admitted quietly, "too textbook. Someone else taught them my way." The first officer's face turned pale. "You mean?" Evan nodded. "One of mine, one I trained personally, and they're using it against me." Outside, the shadowed aircraft executed another maneuver, fast, calculated, almost taunting. Evan mirrored it. The airframe groaned subtly under the strain. His training kicked in. Throttle, rudder, a touch of aileron. A ballet of precision and instinct that only someone who had flown classified missions could execute. The Ghost anticipated again. Viper 1's voice cut sharply. "They're reading you like a book." Evan's stomach twisted. "Then I need to write a new chapter." He banked, a calculated descent to create separation, forcing the unknown aircraft to make the first aggressive move. The plane shook. The cabin lights flickered. The passengers murmured, unaware of the danger looming mere feet above their heads. And then the Ghost responded, faster than physics, sharper than logic. The Boeing trembled under the pressure of aerodynamic interference created by the shadow. Evan's teeth clenched. He realized with a cold clarity that he was facing someone who knew him intimately. Someone who had walked the same line between hero and ghost, just as he had. Viper 1 whispered over the comms, all laced. "Sir, I don't think you've flown against anyone like this before." Evan swallowed, a bitter taste in his mouth. "Neither have I." A sudden, deliberate surge from the unknown aircraft forced Evan into a critical split-second decision. He could follow procedure and maintain the safety envelope, or he could cross the line he'd sworn never to cross. His eyes flicked to the cabin. Lily's small figure, her trusting face, her tiny hands gripping the tablet case, it all anchored him. He chose the line. With micro-adjustments, he guided Flight 218 into a complex series of evasive maneuvers, using every ounce of skill, instinct, and experience he had buried in the last decade. The unknown aircraft countered, anticipating every move. But Evan had an ace he hadn't used in years: creativity born from love, responsibility, and desperation. The first officer gasped, gripping his seat. "Evan, what are you doing?" "Saving lives," Evan said quietly, "and proving that Ghost Rider isn't done yet." The ghost faltered, just enough, barely perceptible but enough. And in that moment, Evan knew the dance was about to change. But the question remained, heavy and haunting. Who was really calling the shots in the sky above Nevada? The unknown aircraft surged again, faster than before, almost playful in its aggression. Evan's pulse spiked. This wasn't just about skill anymore, it was personal. And the sky was about to become a battlefield he never thought he'd return to. The Raptor pilots tensed. "Ghost Rider, you're escalating," Viper 1 warned. Evan's jaw tightened, and it's about to get worse. Because in the sky above 39,000 feet, one truth had resurfaced: Ghost Rider had never really left. And now, everyone on board was trapped in his return. The shadow drew closer. And the first strike in a deadly game of aerial chess was about to begin. The cabin lights flickered again. The gentle hum of Flight 218's engines suddenly felt fragile, like glass stretched across a storm. Evan's eyes were locked on the horizon, tracking the ghost's movements. Every twitch, every subtle surge of air told him exactly what the unknown aircraft intended and what it could do. The first officer leaned in, whispering, "Evan, they're pushing us, full aggressive." "Yes," Evan said, voice low, "and we have no choice but to meet it." He scanned the cockpit displays with mechanical precision. Altitude, airspeed, heading. The instruments were normal, calm, safe. Yet the feeling in the pit of his stomach said otherwise. The ghost was testing him, taunting him, probing every reflex. Viper 1's voice crackled urgently in his headset. "Ghost Rider, that move, that last maneuver, you're putting civilian lives at risk." Evan didn't flinch. "I'm not risking lives, I'm controlling risk. The passengers don't even know what's happening." "Doesn't make it less dangerous," Viper 1 countered, frustration bleeding through the calm military tone. The unknown aircraft surged upward, slicing into Flight 218's vertical path. Evan's heart lurched, not in fear but recognition. He knew that move. He had taught it, once, long ago, to someone he never wanted to see again. The first officer froze, white-knuckled on the console. You know them." "Yes," Evan said, "and they know me." The shadow darted forward again. This time its movements were aggressive, faster, almost playful. It wasn't about striking. It was about intimidation, a test of nerve and skill. Evan felt the old rush: adrenaline, fear, exhilaration. The sensation he had long buried behind normalcy and bedtime stories. Evan's hands moved on instinct. Slight throttle adjustments, subtle rudder shifts, tiny aileron corrections. He created a dance, controlled chaos that only a pilot trained in combat aerobatics could execute, and the ghost mirrored every single move. Viper 1 muttered, "Impossible, nobody reacts that fast." Evan allowed himself a grim smile. "Nobody but me trained them." The unknown aircraft's voice crackled briefly over an encrypted channel, distorted but unmistakable. "Still fast, Ghost Rider, but not fast enough." The words cut deep, not because of challenge, but because they came from someone he had once trusted implicitly. Someone who had been part of a mission that ended in fire and silence. Someone who knew the cost of every move. Outside, the sky shifted. The sun reflected off the shadow's fuselage, a glint of cold metal that sent a chill down Evan's spine. The ghost moved with uncanny precision, exploiting every loophole in aerodynamics that Evan had ever taught. He forced himself to breathe, one thought at a time, one maneuver at a time. The passengers remained unaware, cocooned in false calm. He had trained for this, once, but never with civilians on board. The Shadow dove suddenly, cutting inside Flight 218's flight path. It was a trap. Evan recognized it immediately, a lethal pattern used in classified exercises. His stomach twisted. "Brace for turbulence," the first officer whispered, voice trembling. "No turbulence," Evan said softly. "We're going to make it through clean if I do this right." He initiated a countermove, banking slightly to the right while adjusting thrust to manipulate wake turbulence. The Boeing responded perfectly, an extension of his body, of his reflexes, of his memory. The Ghost faltered just for a split second. That was all Evan needed. Viper 1's voice came through, tense and awestruck. "Sir, you just destabilized them. That was textbook Ghost Rider." Evan exhaled, and now it's time to box them in. He executed the next sequence flawlessly, a series of micro-adjustments that funneled the Shadow into a narrow corridor of airspace. The intruder had two options: climb into detection or risk collision. The unknown aircraft hesitated, calculated hesitation. Evan recognized the move immediately. "They learned this from me." The Raptor pilots reacted instantly. Viper 1's voice clipped over the headset. "Ghost Rider, we've got the box, ready for intercept." Evan didn't speak. His eyes scanned the cockpit, the displays, the horizon. He had one final variable to control, the one thing no military pilot could anticipate: instinct married with improvisation. He nudged Flight 218 slightly upward, just enough to manipulate the airflow. The Ghost followed. And then he did something dangerous, something illegal in civilian skis. He executed a rapid, subtle roll, creating turbulence that forced the unknown aircraft to make its move first. It surged mistimed slightly. Viper 1 gasped, target destabilized. Evan exhaled slowly. The first officer's face was pale. "Evan, what did you just do?" "I crossed a line," Evan said quietly. "One I swore never to cross again, but it's the only way to protect them all." The unknown aircraft recovered instantly, but the advantage had shifted. Evan's careful gamble had forced the Ghost into a corner. For the first time in the aerial duel, he was leading. And that was when the Ghost spoke again, calm, measured, and infuriatingly familiar. "Still flying scared, Ghost Rider?" Evan's jaw tightened. Recognition stabbed him like a knife. The voice belonged to someone who had survived missions no one remembered, who had trained alongside him, who had once been his partner in death-defying exercises. The Shadow surged once more, faster, sharper, closer, an undeniable challenge. Evan's heart pounded. He was not just facing a competitor. He was facing a mirror of the man he used to be. The first officer whispered, trembling, "Evan, they're going to hit us." Evan didn't flinch. He didn't look at the instruments. He only looked forward at the Ghost, at the narrow corridor in the sky, at the lives depending on him. Because the moment had come. And Ghost Rider was about to decide. Would he remain the quiet commercial pilot? Or would he embrace the storm and confront the Ghost from his past, no matter the cost? The unknown aircraft surged forward, closer, faster, merciless. And Evan's next move would decide who survived, who fell, and who would be remembered. The battle in the sky had officially begun. But the deadliest part of all was yet to come. Because someone in that Ghost's past knew Ghost Rider better than anyone. And they weren't finished. The cabin lights flickered again, subtle enough that passengers didn't notice, but inside the cockpit, every twitch of the Boeing felt like glass stretching to breaking. Evan's eyes were fixed on the Shadow that had been stalking them for the last 15 minutes. He could feel its presence almost physically, an intruder in the sky who moved with lethal familiarity, someone who had learned every trick he had ever taught. The first officer's hands were tight on the console. "Evan, this is insane. They're too good." "Yes," Evan replied quietly, "and they've learned from the best." Viper 1's voice crackled urgently over the headset. "Ghost Rider, The intruder isn't just matching you, they're anticipating you. If this continues, civilian lives are at serious risk. Evan didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. He was analyzing, calculating, remembering every lesson, every instinct, every mission that had shaped him into the pilot he had once been, and still was, despite the quiet life he'd built for Lily. The Shadow made another move, sliding to intercept from the left at a near-impossible angle. Evan banked, micro-adjusting the Boeing's ailerons, subtly manipulating wake turbulence to create a pocket of unpredictable air. It was a maneuver he had invented years ago for a program no one would ever acknowledge. The intruder mirrored it instantly. The first officer's voice trembled. They're reading you like a book. Yes, Evan admitted, because I wrote it. He could feel the old adrenaline coursing through him, the same one that had carried him through nights in hostile skis, desert sands under fire, missions that had never existed on any official record. The ghost was testing him, daring him to remember, and he had no choice but to rise to the challenge. Flight 218, Viper 1 said, voice tight. Military command wants confirmation. You are cleared to engage evasive maneuvers, but the civilian envelope is shrinking. You need to act fast. Evan's eyes flicked back at the cabin display. Passengers were blissfully unaware, chatting, laughing, reading, thinking this was just another smooth flight. Lily's small hand was on her tablet, oblivious to the deadly ballet unfolding just above her. He exhaled, jaw tight. I'm ready. The ghost surged again, faster, almost playful in its aggression, testing his reflexes and his decision-making. Evan's hands moved as if on autopilot, every adjustment calculated, subtle, deadly precise. The Boeing responded like a part of his body. The Shadow faltered, just enough for Evan to recognize the opening. Viper 1 gasped. Sir, that move, you destabilized them. That was textbook Ghost Rider. Yes, Evan said softly, and now it's about to get worse. He executed a series of evasive maneuvers, guiding the intruder into a narrow corridor of airspace. The ghost hesitated, calculating its next move, but Evan had anticipated this. Every possibility, every reaction, every instinctive counter. He forced the intruder to either expose itself or retreat. The unknown aircraft surged violently forward, cutting dangerously close to Flight 218. Evan maintained calm, executing a micro-roll, throttle adjustments, rudder shifts, actions that would have made any standard commercial pilot's hands shake with terror. The Shadow responded instantly, but Evan's maneuvers created just enough turbulence to unsettle it. It staggered, not enough to crash, but enough to show vulnerability. Viper 1's voice was awestruck. Ghost Rider, they're faltering. Evan allowed himself a grim smile. This was it, the moment he had trained for in secret missions he'd never spoken of, the moment where instinct, skill, and experience collided. He adjusted once more, banking slightly to the right, forcing the intruder to make a choice. And then, for the first time, he heard the crackle of communication, not from ATC, not from the Raptors, but from the ghost. Ghost Rider, the voice was calm, almost amused. You're fast, but not fast enough. Recognition slammed into Evan like a freight train. He knew that voice. He knew it intimately. This was someone who had trained beside him, someone who had shared nights in hostile skis, missions erased from memory, and secrets burned into mind and muscle. The first officer leaned forward, eyes wide. Evan, you know them. Yes, he said, voice quiet, and they know me. The ghost surged forward again, faster, more aggressive. Evan's pulse quickened, but his hand stayed steady. He wasn't just protecting the passengers now. He was confronting a shadow from his past, a ghost who had survived, someone who remembered everything, someone who had never forgiven. The cabin trembled under the air currents, unnoticed by passengers who thought it was turbulence. Evan stole a glance at Lily, her small figure engrossed in her tablet, trusting him to keep her safe. She had no idea what was happening above her head. Evan's mind raced. He could force the intruder into a trap, but it meant crossing the line he had sworn never to cross again. He could expose his identity, but it would make him a target. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to go back to civilian life. But the lives of 147 passengers and Lily depended on him. "Viper 1, he said, voice low and steady, "we're going to end this on my terms." A long silence followed. Then the Raptor pilot responded, cautious but respectful, standing by. The shadow lurked, a dark silhouette against the afternoon sun, testing, probing, waiting. Evan's fingers flexed on the controls. His training, his experience, his instincts, everything he had buried for years surged forward. And then it came. The intruder made a critical miscalculation. Not a fatal one, but enough for Evan to see the opening. "Now," he whispered. The Raptors flanked, and Evan executed a maneuver that forced the Ghost into a narrow corridor. The intruder faltered, the first genuine pause in its relentless assault. Viper 1's voice was tense. "Ghost Rider, it's working. Target is boxed." Evan didn't celebrate. There was no time. The Ghost was cunning, adaptive, and personal. It wouldn't stay trapped for long. His pulse thundered in his ears. He glanced at the instruments, altitude stable, speed steady. The passengers remained blissfully unaware, lives balanced on a knife's edge. And somewhere out there, the Ghost's pilot was planning the next move. Evan realized with a sinking certainty that this wasn't over. The intruder had found him, known him, challenged him. And now, with every maneuver, every shift of air, every heartbeat, Evan Cole understood one immutable truth. Ghost Rider never truly leaves, and neither do the ghosts chasing him. The shadow shifted again, approaching faster than before. And Evan's next decision would determine who lived and who fell from the sky above Nevada. The first strike had been made. The deadliest was still to come. The Boeing shuddered subtly under Evan's control, responding to maneuvers that no commercial plane was ever meant to endure. The passengers were blissfully oblivious, chatting, scrolling, laughing, completely unaware that every second above them was a high-stakes duel between a father and a ghost from his past. Evan's eyes never left the sky. The unknown aircraft lurked, precise and lethal, exploiting every micro-adjustment he made, mirroring moves he hadn't used in years. It was as if the ghost knew him better than anyone alive. The first officer's voice trembled. "Evan, you're not just flying against some random pilot. This is personal." "Yes," Evan said, jaw tight, "and they're not just any pilot." Viper 1's voice came in, clipped and professional but carrying unmistakable awe. "Sir, Command is requesting immediate debrief upon landing. They want you in a secure room." Evan exhaled slowly. Secure room, military brass, official questions, and likely scrutiny he didn't want. He managed to leave that life behind the day Lily was born. He had a home, a routine, a quiet existence. He wasn't ready to step back into the world that had made him Ghost Rider. Yet the intruder hadn't given him the choice. The unknown aircraft surged again, this time accelerating aggressively, diving in a calculated arc designed to force Evan to overreact. He anticipated it, adjusting throttle and banking subtly, but the sheer audacity of the move made his pulse spike. Viper 1 gasped over the comms, "Sir, that move, it's impossible." Evan allowed himself a grim smile. Nothing's impossible when they trained us the same way. The ghost had learned his tactics, mirrored his signature maneuvers, and now sought to draw him out, to make him respond with instinct, not caution, and Evan had no choice but to oblige. He executed a series of complex maneuvers, subtle rolls, precision banking, and minor thrust adjustments, designed to manipulate airflow in a way that could destabilize an aircraft only trained to anticipate these exact moves. The ghost faltered, just slightly, but enough to reveal a pattern Evan hadn't expected. He noticed it immediately. A hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty, a flaw in the precision that had so far made the intruder untouchable. Viper One's voice crackled, tense with disbelief. "Target, they're faltering. Ghost Rider, you've got an opening." Evan exhaled. One opening, one chance. He had to be careful. A miscalculation could turn Flight 218 into a tomb for everyone on board. He nudged the Boeing slightly, executing a subtle but critical vertical shift that forced the intruder to choose: retreat and risk exposure, or continue and risk destabilization. The shadow hesitated. "Do it now," Evan whispered almost to himself. The Raptor pilots moved instantly, converging on the intruder's position. Viper One's voice was sharp and efficient. "Engage, intercept, minimal force." The Ghost reacted, trying to escape, but Evan's manipulation of the airflow and positioning boxed it in perfectly. The aircraft shuddered under aerodynamic pressure, staggered, and then paused. Viper One's voice broke with awe. "Target stabilized but boxed. They're trapped." Evan's hands relaxed slightly on the yoke, but only slightly. He couldn't afford to let down his guard. He glanced at Lily's small figure, earbuds in, trusting him completely. Her innocent laughter anchored him to reality. The unknown aircraft transmitted a final message, distorted but unmistakable. "Ghost Rider, you remember everything, but this isn't over." Recognition slammed into Evan like a freight train. He knew the voice intimately, the same one who had survived missions erased from history, shared nights in hostile skis, and bore the weight of secrets he thought he'd left behind. He exhaled slowly, the tension in the cockpit easing, but only for a moment. Command had already been alerted. Military brass were watching, waiting to question him, and the intruder, the ghost from his past, was still out there, invisible, untouchable, waiting for the next move. Evan looked at the runway ahead, gleaming in the Nevada sunlight. Cameras, military vehicles, and officials lined the tarmac. Reporters would swarm. Stories would be written. His life as a quiet commercial pilot was over. The first officer's voice trembled. "Evan, they're going to know who you are. Everything, the legends, the call sign, Ghost Rider." "Yes," Evan said quietly, voice steady but heavy. "And it's true, they're going to know." The shadow faded into the horizon, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But Evan knew it was watching, waiting, calculating, planning. The Boeing descended, steady, calm, under his perfect control. The Raptors peeled off, signaling that their part was over, leaving Evan in command. As the wheels kissed the tarmac, a new reality pressed down on him. He had survived, protected every life on board, and outmaneuvered a ghost who knew him better than anyone else alive. But the exposure was inevitable. His identity, his past, his legend, everything would soon be revealed. He taxied to the gate, passengers unaware, lives saved. Lily looked up from her tablet, smiling, completely unaware of the chaos that had unfolded in the sky above. "Daddy, that was fun," she said innocently. Evan forced a smile, choking back the storm inside. "Yeah, fun." Officers met him as he stepped out of the cockpit. Military vehicles, briefings, cameras, reporters, everything he had avoided for years. One file was handed to him, satellite images of the Ghost, mission debriefs, notes he had never seen before. The intruder's insignia, a name, a mission that had never ended. The general spoke quietly, eyes locked on Evan. "The pilot calling you out, they're not done. They want a final reckoning." Evan swallowed, heart tight. The sky had delivered a message, and now the ground confirmed it. Someone from his past had returned, and their game was far from over. Lily tugged on his hand. "Daddy, are we going home now?" Evan looked down at her small, trusting face. He nodded, but his mind was already racing. Because somewhere out there, the ghost was waiting. And Ghost Rider wasn't just a call sign anymore. It was a warning. The past had returned. And it wasn't finished with him yet. Evan Cole stepped off the Boeing onto the tarmac, the sun burning the Nevada sky, glare bouncing off the polished fuselage. Reporters swarmed immediately, cameras flashing, questions hurled. But he ignored them, his focus on Lily, her small hand gripping his. Her world was still small and safe, and he intended to keep it that way. Behind him, the hum of the Raptors had faded, leaving only a tense silence that he could feel in his bones. The ghost was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. The confrontation in the sky had ended, but the war was far from over. Military officers guided him toward a waiting SUV, briefcases in hand. Satellite images, encrypted logs, and mission files, every record the brass could find, were pressed into his hands. Viper One's Raptor squawked low on the frequency. "Ghost Rider, you've got to read this. It's your past, unmasked." Evan didn't respond immediately. He tucked Lily into the vehicle and climbed in himself, feeling the weight of years pressing down on him. Every life he had saved, every ghost he had buried, every secret he had maintained, it all converged now. The past didn't forgive, and the ghost wasn't done. The SUV moved. Cameras, officials, reporters blurred past. Evan's mind raced, processing the mission debriefs, satellite readings, the cryptic notes tied to the shadow he had confronted in the sky. Every move he had made, every countermove the intruder had executed, every instinct he had relied upon, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. The ghost knew him, entirely, and they had returned for a reckoning. Inside, the briefing room awaited. Officers had cleared it for maximum security, but Evan knew the walls couldn't contain history. He set Lily safely in a corner with a tablet and headphones. Her laughter, bright and innocent, cut through the tension. He forced a smile for her. "This is for you, Lily. Always." The general entered, a cold, precise presence. "Cole, sit." His voice carried the weight of years spent commanding pilots who were never supposed to return. Evan seated himself. On the table, the files lay open, images of sleek aircraft, mission coordinates, encrypted radio transcripts, and the unmistakable silhouette of the intruder. The general's eyes locked on his. "This pilot, the one calling you Ghost Rider, they've survived operations erased from history. Not only survived, but adapted every maneuver, every signature tactic you ever taught. They know you, and now they're active again. Your intervention saved lives today, but the ghost isn't finished." Evan exhaled slowly, letting the air carry some of the tension away. "How do I stop them without risking the civilians next time?" The general's jaw tightened. "You don't. You contain them, that's your mission now, and the world won't know you're doing it." Evan leaned back, absorbing the gravity of the statement. For years, he had hidden behind commercial flights, bedtime stories, and normality. But normality was over. The ghost's return had shattered it, forcing him back into the skis he had left behind. Viper One's voice crackled over the secure line. "Sir, intelligence has cross-referenced radar logs. The ghost's profile matches none of our active pilots, yet they executed maneuvers only someone with your training could predict. They aren't just skilled, they're perfected." Evan's gaze hardened. "Perfected because they learned from me, because I taught them everything." Silence fell. The room seemed smaller, heavier, as though the ghost's presence had seeped through the walls. Every officer, every analyst, every technician in that room knew something unspoken. They were witnessing history, and Ghost Rider was at the center. Lily's laughter echoed softly from her corner. Evan's chest tightened. The stakes were no longer abstract. Every decision, every maneuver, every strategy was tethered to her small life, the lives of passengers, and the unseen battle above American skies. The files on the table revealed one chilling detail. The ghost had left breadcrumbs, a calculated trail of maneuvers, signals, and encrypted transmissions designed to ensure Evan would find them. The confrontation today hadn't been accidental, it had been deliberate. "You've been marked," Viper One said quietly, reverence and warning mixing in his tone. And only someone who understands you, who knows your every move, could do this. Evan clenched his fists. His past was alive, breathing, hunting. The skis were no longer a sanctuary, they were a gauntlet. The general's voice broke through the tension. "Cole, this is your life now. Your family, your passengers, your nation, they all depend on your vigilance. Ghost Rider isn't a name anymore. It's a warning." Evan's eyes swept the room, taking in the weight of command, the legacy of his training, and the cold truth. The skis he loved were now a battlefield once again. He exhaled, "Then I'll be the warning and the shield." The briefings ended, but the message was clear. Someone from his past had returned, unmatched in skill and relentless in purpose. They had challenged him in the sky today, but the game had only just begun. Outside, the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The Raptors had already returned to base, their presence a silent acknowledgement of what had unfolded. The ghost was out there, unseen, waiting, calculating. Evan looked down at Lily. Her small, trusting face reminded him why he survived, why he adapted, why he had returned to the skis today. His hands rested gently on hers, a silent promise. The world would never know the battle that had occurred above them. The passengers of Flight 218 would never see the ghost that hovered near, challenging a man they only knew as their pilot. But Evan Cole, Ghost Rider, would never forget. He looked up at the sky, heart steady, pulse tempered by the calm after chaos. Somewhere just beyond sight, the intruder waited, ready for the next encounter. Evan smiled grimly, "Then let them come." The wind whispered against the terminal walls. The desert sun dipped lower, and somewhere in the clouds above Nevada, Ghost Rider was rising again. The legend wasn't over. It had only returned. And for Evan Cole, the line between father and fighter, civilian and ghost, would never be the same again. The end.